Are you a parent navigating the complexities of co-parenting, family court, or even domestic violence? If you are looking for ways to help protect your children and build a strong and supportive community around you, then look no further. Gray Minds Think Alike is your go-to resource for everything related to the complexities of family life. Join us as we dive into thoughtful conversations with experts and explore practical tips and strategies for tackling the challenges of parenthood in the throes of adversity so that no parent feels alone and every child's safety is protected. Welcome back to Gray Minds Think Alike, where we dive deep into the conversations that matter most with experts who enlighten, inspire, and empower. Today, we're talking about something every parent experiences, but very few of us were ever taught how to handle, and that's anger, conflict, and emotional regulation. Joining me today is Davina Hehn, a trained therapist turned mental health coach and an anger and conflict specialist. Davina describes herself as a professional friend, helping people learn how to advocate for themselves, regulate their nervous systems, and navigate difficult conversations without causing collateral damage in the relationships that matter most. Davina's work focuses on breaking generational cycles, the patterns many of us unknowingly repeat because we were never actually taught how to handle big emotions or conflict in healthy ways. Today's we're talking about anger, communication, parenting triggers, and how we can raise emotionally resilient children while also doing our own healing work along the way. So thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. I wish these topics were more present when I was an earlier parent than they are now.
1000%. I guess as a parent or anyone, you don't actually think about these things until you're in the midst of, a child's tantrum or whatnot. So giving parents or people in general just tools is really important. So I guess if you wanted to start with a brief description of how you began doing what you do, why you got into this specific topic.
Yeah. So my background is in psychology, forensics in particular, and post-grad school, I knew I didn't want to do therapy, but I knew I still wanted to be an agent of change in people's lives and still be in this position. And so I actually chose anger management in an attempt to fix my husband. He at the time was very expressive, very explosive with his anger, much more of an external expressor as men tend to be. And he at the time wasn't open to doing the work. And so, of course, like being the fixer that I am and the overstepper that I have a tendency to be, I got trained in it in hopes that I could infiltrate from within and help fix him and guide him through it. And it was on day one of my training that I learned that I am a very big problem, that I contribute really poorly. And because he's an external expressor, as men tend to be, and I am an internal expressor, so much more of an emotional punisher, much more of an unintended shamer. I learned so much. Yeah, I'm listening.
It's me.
It's one of those things that I think we as women, we kind of convert our anger into more of like a protective shutdown. And sometimes even into a way of shaming them for not being able to keep their cool contained in the same way that we can. And I was very quick into that training that I just had this like the corners of the room coming in on me and realizing how big of a problem I was and how much I contributed to our dynamic being really poor. And that was kind of the start of me realizing this and taking a different approach. And then we became parent, and that overwhelmed our ability to cope. It was not something that we had prepared for, not anything that I felt like we were warned about, was how viscerally we can feel rage at a point when we never had before. And all of a sudden, as a parent, I was then the external. I was the one who could not keep my shit together. I was the one who was behaving in atrocious ways and did not know how to fix that, how to remedy it, how to even understand it, even being this anger management professional that I was at the time. And so much of this work pivoted away from the court-ordered, only men on the tail end of an ultimatum kind of work that I was doing and into more parenting, partnering, taking more of a professional friend approach away from a clinical, criminalized kind of field that anger management is, and trying to normalize this so that we can all lead with more curiosity about where this is coming from, more compassion and grace for ourselves for experiencing it at all, and ultimately be able to actually transform our anger from this like deep, dark, ugly, aggressive thing into something that demands advocacy, that empowers us, that then becomes our compass.
Now, you often say most of us were never actually taught how to handle emotions or conflict. Why is anger anger such a misunderstood emotion? Is it like all these feelings that just blurt itself out?
Yeah, I mean, one, yes. Two, anger can be incredibly destructive. And the reason why I find it to be so misunderstood is that we attribute aggression as the only behavior that should be attached to that emotion. And anger is such a mobilizing emotion because it's our biggest advocate. It is our most protective emotion. And so if we weren't taught what else to do with it, then we will ultimately repeat that same kind of cycle. And emotional literacy is something that I firmly believe should be treated just as importantly as intellectual literacy. There is a whole language to it. There is a full ability to grasp concepts within there that we aren't taught. And yet we assume that because our body ages biologically, chronologically, that somehow our emotional brain and our emotional literacy should as well. And that's very much where I focus so much of my attention, is building these skills little by little and allowing that emotional brain, that child in us that's running this adult body, to evolve and mature over time along with.
I know for me personally, anger also drives a lot of my motivation. My son was murdered. I have a lot of anger. I started this podcast from anger because I need to see change happen. And that is what actually drives me sometimes. So I want to just preface that anger can be healthy and good because it actually drives change.
Well, yeah. And because you found a direction to place it within. So many of us feel this anger and we get kind of so trapped and absorbed within it. We ruminate within it and we feel directionless. We go more destruction focused. And I'm sure there were plenty of times that it did for you, but what it ultimately brought you was this compass, was this direction, this path to take it so that your anger wasn't felt in vain. Your anger had somewhere to go. And that's usually what ends up happening, is because anger is such a mobilizing emotion, it demands something be different, something change. But because so many of us, when we experience it, there's a neurochemistry that's happening that we kind of lose the ability to think rationally, to consider the next 15 minutes of my life instead of just the next 15 seconds. And I applaud you in your ability to convert that anger, harness it, and position it in a way that not only demands change, but helps prevent atrocities like that from happening again.
Right. Well, I know a lot of our listeners are parents navigating difficult family court issues or parenting issues or stuff like that. I guess many parents worry about showing that anger in front of the children. As someone who went through it, dealing with the co-parent, and hiding that is very difficult. So what's the difference between suppressing the anger and regulating it?
Yeah. So I'm a firm believer that our kids need to see us behave in ugly ways every so often. I think they need to see what the stressors of adulthood can actually do to us, and also get the opportunity to see how incremental, how slow moving long-term change can actually be. And so there is this part about the whole suppressing anger is more about just shoving this down, acting like it doesn't exist, or feeling the anger, expressing it really quickly, probably in like a really funky way, and then not doing anything to repair or navigate that moving forward. So the difference there is, what I used to do was the suppression of, I would feel a ton of anger and I would want something to be done about it. I would want to say something. I would want to do something about it. But then I would immediately feel so much guilt that like, these are just little kids. And who am I? Like, what? I don't want to cause them harm. I'm in the mental health profession. Kids of parents in the mental health profession are notoriously the most fucked up. I'm trying not to repeat these patterns. And so I would kind of gaslight myself and say like, well, they're just kids. And of course they're going to do this. And of course that other parent's going to do this, and kind of make it more of a me problem as opposed to acknowledging just what I'm feeling within me and then moving through. So the suppression is more so this toxic positivity of let it go. It's not a big deal. Shove it down. Don't be irrational, that kind of thing. And the regulating is actually acknowledging what's happening in your body, giving it life, putting the spotlight on it, and allowing for us to know that, one, it's a normal emotion, and two, if we are not experiencing anger, something is wrong. We need it. It's a protector. And so the actual regulation of it looks like just acknowledging it within ourselves, separating ourselves for a few minutes if we need to, even while the kids are still tantruming, even while this adult is still going wild in the background. It's taking that time to just give myself a minute to acknowledge, I am angry. This is what I'm feeling. My heart's racing. My breathing is shallow. I want to do X, Y, Z, and I am going to do A, B, C instead. And being able to take more of that anger and utilize it as that compass, as that thing that demands that I set a boundary, as being the one who in the moment will feel like I'm losing because I don't get to yell and scream and do the things that I want to do, but knowing that in the long term, I am actually getting closer to being the person that I want to be and the safest possible version of me for my kids, for myself, for the people around me.
Right. And in the case, like if it's external forces that are causing your anger and not actually what the child is doing, sometimes I would just let it roll off my shoulder for the time being and then deal with it once the child went to bed or whatnot, just so they didn't see things that they really didn't need to see.
Yeah, no, totally. And there's a finesse to it that we eventually learn to navigate within. But in the early parts, it's really challenging. So how did you, like when you say that you let it roll off, what did that actually look like in real time for you?
Just let's say I was getting text messages from Greyson's father and they were making me angry. I would have this beautiful little boy in front of me and I would focus in on what I was doing with him or what I was doing in other aspects. And I would ignore the text as much as I could and deal with it at a later date or not at all.
Well, I applaud your ability to do that. For a lot of
it took a long time because I realized when you're dealing with someone who's narcissistic and have coercive controlling behaviors, you're just fueling the fire when you respond as much as you really want to. Sometimes you just have to step away and say, I'm not fueling this fire. I'm not giving more to this conversation.
No, and it's such a powerful thing to be able to do. And I applaud you for being able to do that for a lot of us because it feels like losing, because not saying something in the moment feels like they win, like they got something over me. There is a really big sense of an ego, and not ego in the way that a lot of people portray it, but more so like my sense of self, my identity, my self-worth. That's what all of these things, when we experience anger, it's almost like all of those are up for grabs.
Right. No, and there were so many times I wanted to respond, especially when he was defaming me or questioning my character and things like that. I'm just like, and at first I did respond, and then it would just keep going and going and going. It wouldn't be that never ending thread of text. So at some point I was just like, you know what? He's out of his mind and I have to remember that. Mm-hmm. And I am not going to engage. So
yeah, I usually describe it as taking really shiny bait, but like the people around us who know how to get under our skin the most, right? They will put out this bait, be really shiny, really enticing, smell really good. And for the most part, all of us will kind of just we'll just chomp it right up. And the work is being able to recognize when the bait is there, whether it's their intention or not, the impact is still there. And then we get to determine whether we are the one who ends up with a hook in our lip, getting gutted on a boat, or whether we are going to be the one to see it, acknowledge it, and still keep swimming right.
Now, parenting can trigger our own unresolved emotions. Why does raising kids often bring up so many of our own reactions and patterns?
So we are mirror beings, right? And so there's going to be this part where we are going to relive our childhood in the eyes of our kids constantly. We're going to consider what kind of lifestyle we had when our child was 2, when we denied veggies, when we denied the meal, when we refused to go to sleep. What kind of response did we get from our parent? And a lot of this is kind of just running in the background. And there is constantly this comparison. And the reason why that creates so much discomfort in us is, for the most part, a lot of us weren't raised in a way that we were allowed to experience emotions. We weren't allowed really to say no or to dissent. For many of us, we are raising kids in a better circumstance than we got growing up. And there's this constant battle between deep gratitude that my children are getting a different kind of experience than I did, perhaps, and also this deep level of resentment, this deep level of envy that I have that they are getting what I didn't. So no matter what, our brain is incredibly powerful and we are prediction machines constantly. So when that's coming through, we are trying to predict the future outcome. We're scared of the future. I grew up with my eldest brother being an addict from the time I was 10 or 11 years old. And each time I see my eldest son behaving in ways that my brother used to, it immediately sounds this alarm in my mind of like, oh, no, like we need to get on top of this. We can't let him do it like this. And almost act as if we can predict the future based on the current behaviors. So many of us, if we don't realize it, we are reliving all of these experiences. My son is in 3rd grade. One of my worst experiences was when I was in 3rd grade. And if I don't acknowledge that kind of overlap, the fact that our childhoods may rhyme in some way, then I'm more likely to repeat patterns unintentionally because I'm not even paying enough attention to notice that it's sounding an alarm in my mind.
And I know for me, like my parents got divorced when I was really little, and I always wanted to give my child a complete opposite, like of what my parents were and did.
Yeah.
So I feel like, although I'm sure there were a lot of times where I sounded like my mom or did things like my mom did, I also made a very conscious decision to not be like her and to do things that I wish she did different. So now you mentioned how like kids maybe couldn't say no back then. Do you ever feel like kids today are sort of entitled?
I think we overcorrect. I think for a lot of us, we grew up with so much rigidity that we didn't see the benefit of in the long term. And so we overcorrected into what has, of course, been described as gentle parenting, but it's actually permissive parenting. And we've kind of jumped the shark. We've gone too far over in assuming that our kids have the wherewithal, the know-withal, the knowledge and the lessons that we've learned from that, but they aren't. They're fresh slates. They're clean slates who will overstep and take advantage where they can. They will manipulate based on not out of malice, but just out of self-serving bias. Yeah. They're very intelligent, very cunning. And that overstep definitely comes through. And so now there were certain things that I said I would never do as a parent that now I've called my mom many times over to apologize to her, saying like, I get it now. I see it now. My bad. I'm so sorry. I was such a bitch. There's so many of these things that come through, but there's a really strong middle ground that I find to be so important that if we just yes man our kids, we will end up with entitled kids who are unkind, who don't really value respect. Yeah. And then we will then use our anger as aggression and demand respect. But we all know that respect isn't demanded. It can't be commanded. It has to be earned. And so there really is this big difference between permissive parenting and what was intended to be gentle parenting, which was just not using aggression, still holding a boundary strong, still saying, hey, it's a no and here's why it's a no. So much of it was supposed to be not only giving the rules of the game like we got, but also telling them the objective, why they're playing at all, how they can make some moves on their own instead of just hearing yes, no, maybe. And again, I think we overcorrected. And then we get to a point that so many of the parents that come to me, they're raising 10, 11, 12 plus year old kids saying, I really messed up in their early years. I didn't say no. I let them get away with everything. There was this part of me that was just so desperate with good intention to give them a really positive, lax childhood. And now I do not know how to contain this child who's about to be an adult soon.
You talk about breaking the generational cycles, like we're talking about our parents and whatnot. What are some of the most common emotional patterns that you see parents repeating?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. One of the main ones.
And how do we break them?
Totally. One of the main ones that I see is losing our shit and then overcorrecting to being like Mary Poppins the next morning and not actually addressing what happened in between. We assume that if I lose my shit and then I show my child I'm sorry through action, through overcorrecting the next morning, the next day, that they'll get that I'm sorry and we'll be able to move on. But with the uncertainty, with the fear, with the discomfort that comes from that blow up, kids need to know where to place that. They need to know how to understand it, how to express it, how to name it. And so that's one of the biggest gaps that I've noticed is that part that we just kind of want to move past it. We feel so much shame and guilt and gross about the way that we handled it that we would rather just keep things good and just keep them smiling, trying to keep the peace. But ultimately that child ends up ruminating, not really knowing what they did wrong or what that really was. So one of the things that I found to be most helpful is to go to my kids later and say, hey, when I got upset last night, when I said this, what was your understanding of that? What did you experience during that time? And I'd say probably 8, 9 times out of 10, their understanding of what they did, quote unquote, wrong is off. It's not actually what sparked me. It's not actually what was upsetting. And so we get an opportunity to correct that so that I don't think that they get it clearly because they're also acting in their best way the next day. And we are just continuously missing the mark. The same thing goes for parents. When we fight in front of our kids, they can still hear us through closed doors. They are still deeply dysregulated and uncomfortable by our conflict. And us going from yelling in front of them or yelling behind a closed door to then hunky-dory, perfectly fine, acting like nothing happened, that's confusing. They're not learning the skills of how to get from point A to point Z. And so what we've done with our kids is we'll come back around and ask them like, hey, you heard me and Papa, you heard us fighting behind the closed door. Do you have any questions for us? Can we explain, let us explain to you. And actually what we're going to do is apologize to each other in front of you so you can learn what this looks like. So sometimes it's really smooth and we each take accountability and it's fine. Every so often in our attempt to do that, one of us gets flared up and then the kids actually get to watch us work through it and watch us be able to communicate where we're coming from, where the other person was, what we understood, what we didn't. But this is, of course, years into it. Our kids are now 6 and nearly 9. We started really diving into this work about 5 years ago when my husband found sobriety. So there's a lot of turmoil and conflict that they experienced during my husband's active drinking days, my active drinking days, when we kind of definitely didn't know what the hell we were doing. So now we're at this point, but at first it was much more messy. It was much more confusing, but everything started with that intention of, to your point, Allie, not just saying what I don't want to do as a parent, which is where I think a lot of us get caught up, and instead pointing toward what I do want to do. Right. My husband had always told me that he didn't want to be an angry alcoholic like his father was, but he didn't point his direction. He didn't point himself in what do I actually want to be instead. It was just don't do that. And then he became an angry alcoholic father until, of course, we intervened and he did the work and advocated for himself in these ways. But that's definitely like two of the biggest things that I see as make these mistakes in parenting.
Now, if a couple is divorced or going through a divorce and the child has 2 homes, how do you get the other parent on board with sort of the same sort of emotional regulation? Or how do you teach it to the kids? Or the other parent?
Yeah. I mean, so I work with a lot of high conflict co-parenting situations, either navigating from the end of the marriage through co-parenting or sometimes just in the midst of it. And sometimes we do have people who are not able to communicate really well together, where like the prompting for more emotional intelligence just simply cannot come from the co-parent. They will undermine it and dismiss it immediately, even if it's good advice. And sometimes through a mediator or someone like me who works with both sides independently, I do see a lot of really positive outcomes. A lot of the time, though, it just doesn't work out. A lot of us just aren't on the same page. We feel like me regulating means giving the other person a better time, and we just don't want to give that to them. So then we rob ourselves and our children of it too. So in those cases, what we do is work with the parent who is committed to doing the work and teach them how to do that with their kids, how to talk to their kids about when you're in this other household, when you start to feel XYZ, listen to your body. When your heart starts racing, you get scared, you get uncomfortable. Here's what we can do about it. So much of this is understanding what is actually within our locus of control, what's within our influence, and what is purely neither. And the uncertainty of what happens in that person's household is incredibly scary and uncomfortable. And sometimes what keeps us so dysregulated that I can't even quite regulate myself when they're under my roof either. But through that work and taking this radical self-responsibility over what I can do and giving grace and compassion to myself for what I have no control over, that's usually how we get there.
Well, I know a lot of families practice the parallel parenting for when they each have their time sharing, where it's like, whatever goes on in my house is my house. Whatever goes on at your house is your house. And we don't have to be on the same page. And I just never understood that because it's very confusing for the child to have two separate way of functioning every day, especially when they're young. Well, I know for me, like there's something that like actually haunts me to this day is I once got so angry at Gray we were playing out front and I had these like solar lights that were made of glass that lined our walkway. And he was playing roughly and he tripped over one and broke and there was glass everywhere. And I was screaming at him and I ran in the house crying. And I felt so bad at that point. You know, I cleaned up the glass and then I went into his room and I apologized and I told him why I got mad, why I got angry, what I did wrong, why I yelled. And of course we hugged it out and we went on with our day. But to this day, it still bothers me that I did that because he didn't deserve that. So obviously I was taking some other sort of emotions and putting it into something that really didn't warrant it.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's going to be plenty of those. In your case, you got robbed of the ability to see that long term and to see that how likely minuscule that was in his world long term, right? But of course, there's so many of these times that we error, we overextend, we make something a bigger deal than it is, but ultimately ultimately, when we can go to our kids and say, hey, here's why I got so upset. Here's why it makes sense to me. And here's why I misstepped. Here's what I should have done instead, so that it's not just this all or nothing. Like what a lot of parents do is we get really upset. I was just talking to a dad recently where one of his kids broke one of his like figurines it was like what's a word for it?
Heirloom?
Like
money?
Like a collectible.
Collector, yeah.
Yeah. And he was furious, of course, just so upset. And he yelled at his son. And then later on went in there and just kind of gaslit himself to his son constantly. Like, it's just a figurine. I should not have been upset. You're way more important than that is. And almost diminished his initial upset that had so much validation, that had so much realistic reason to be upset about. And that's where I noticed some of us sometimes overcorrecting to completely diminishing their upset from the beginning. No, you're allowed to be upset. You had told him multiple times to not go in there. You've asked him many times not to go in there for this reason. And so we have to be able to accept multiple truths at the same time. Even if they seemingly contradict, emotions don't follow those rules. Humans don't follow those rules. And so when we do go and apologize, we can say, hey, here's what it was. Not only was I upset about that glass breaking, about that light breaking, it's also glass. And I was scared for you.
Which is what I told him.
Right. Yeah.
I said it was glass. I didn't want you to get hurt and and I, whatever.
Yeah. And so what I did with it makes sense. Why I got upset makes sense and is valid and true and real. And I do not apologize for getting angry. I do apologize for what I did with my anger. And here's what I wish I would have done instead. Here's what I'm going to work on, and keep that on your radar so you can see it too.
Now, words that when you're like, well, just communicate better. Like, how do you actually communicate better? And what are some tangible tools that parents can use in the moment when they're feeling reactive?
Yeah, I think
is it like stop and take a deep breath and count to 4 like we tell our toddlers?
It's not going to work like that. Like their brains are like our brain goes through what's called the amygdala hijack. So like our survival part of our brain that assesses the threat pulls the blood supply from our logical brain. So even if we know when people tell us to calm down, like all it does is flare us back up. Yeah. The whole point here is that in those times, what I think a lot of parents get are these scripts that are like best case scenario of, honey, I'm really upset. I'm going to take a minute and I'm going to go calm down and then I'll be back and we'll talk. It's just so impractical, especially for us at the beginning. Okay. So I usually recommend that we just it can be big, it can be loud, but no matter what, we do need to kind of separate ourselves from that situation. There's like our eyes are constantly taking in all of this information, and an active difference in environment can make a huge, huge difference for us. So we don't need anything that sounds super cute or manicured. We just need something that sounds like, I need a minute. I'm angry. I'm upset. I need a minute. And we go and we remove ourselves. Sometimes we can't, and we're in the car with them, or we're the only one home, or we just physically cannot leave them alone. And that's when we start modeling in front of them. We notice what's happening. One of the biggest things that I've practiced in real time is almost like switching my perspective of what I must be like and the way that I might be presenting through their lens. Because I'm only seeing it from my lens, from all of my adult shit, all of my wounds that continuously get picked, and all of these things that I struggle with. And what I've started doing in real time, not only when I'm flared up, but in between as well, when they ask me to play or whatever it might be, is I quite literally do my best to like switch that perspective of, from their lens looking at me, what can I do? What am I presenting with? Not to root out shame or to make us feel guilty, but instead to give us a realistic account of what our kids are looking at, what our kids are seeing. So in that moment, it doesn't have to be anything super cute. It can just be, I need a minute and I'm going to take a breath. They will still continue screaming. They will still continue kicking the back of the seat and hitting the window and doing all of these things. But if you can do your best to just say, I need a minute, I will be with you in a minute, or anything that just acknowledges that you love them, that you're still here, and take a literal few seconds to just look out the window, get a new different kind of visual stimuli.
How do you get them to stop that kicking in the car or doing without reacting?
I mean, it's really hard, right? It's not easy at all. A lot of the time, it can either be something where you address it right then, or you just let them gas out. Because in that moment, their brain is flooded. We are more capable of being able to be the one to regulate and keep our shit together than they will ever be at that point. And so sometimes we just let it keep going, even though it's infuriating.
What do you need right now that will make you stop kicking the chair?
Yeah. And a lot of it tends to be more boundary setting of, I will not tolerate this versus do not do this. Right. So like my son, the other day, I was in his room, which I am in now, and he was screaming in my face. And so instead of telling him stop screaming at me, which is control, I said, I don't let myself be yelled at by people. I don't tolerate this. If you're going to keep going, I will leave the room. And it's okay if you're upset, but I won't stay for it. And modeling that I don't want my kids growing up with the expectation that other people have to conform and bend and change in order for them to stay regulated. I want them to feel confident in their ability to advocate for themselves and remove themselves when they're able from behaviors that they're not comfortable being exposed to. So sometimes in the car, my kids will hear me say, stop kicking. They will hear me going, of course, like the full blown control because these are my things, and stop treating them poorly. And this is disrespectful and all of these narratives that we can have. But what they'll hear most off from me is like, I want you in this car with me. I will not tolerate you treating my car poorly. And then of course it's usually an empty threat that like, you will get out. But just the other day, I had my 6 and my 8-year-old walk the rest of the way home because that's what they were doing in the back of the car. And I pulled over and I said, I'm not going to tolerate this in my car. Get out. You can walk home. Given we were like right at the front of our entrance, but still, there's still that part that
principle.
Yeah, 100%. And following through.
Yeah, that's the hard part, follow through. Because you might think or want to do these certain things, but actually using those tools is another story.
Totally. So. And that's where like what are threats that we make, these consequences that we tell them will come through. That's why it's so important that they be measured. Because what usually we hear is eat your dinner, I won't feed you anymore. It's like, well, right. I can't follow through
or
with
go
that.
to bed hungry. And you'd be like, well, exactly. I can't send him to bed hungry because then he'll tell his father and we're going through a divorce. I mean, there's so many.
Totally.
things.
And that's why like everything just has to be measured, but we get desperate when we haven't followed through with so many small things. When the big thing hits or we perceive it as being a big thing, we are going to go over. We will overcorrect into something that is so impractical that not only will I not follow through, I can't follow through on. And then my threats don't carry any weight.
So you talk about emotional literacy. What is it and what role does it play in raising resilient children and how do you use it?
Yeah. I mean, it's so much more about understanding that our emotions are energy in motion. They are things that happen to us physiologically. It's no longer the days of mental health only being your brain and it has nothing to do with your body.
Right.
So the emotional literacy comes similar to learning how to read, where first you just identify the letters, then you learn their sounds. Here we're identifying what's happening in our body and what it feels like. So before my kids name what they're feeling, we first start with what they're experiencing in their body. Your face is getting red, your breathing's getting more shallow, your heart is racing, you're shaking, you're wanting to stomp, voice, right? Like that energy needs to go somewhere. And so the acknowledgement for all of us to notice what happens first, because before we even notice that, before we consciously see that our brain has detected a threat, our body goes into hyperdrive. That part of our brain can recognize it within milliseconds. It's faster than the blink of an eye. So we are more likely to feel the physiological experience of our emotion before the rational, more conscious way that we tend to name it and label it. So we first start with just understanding what this feels like in my body, learning about the brain, understanding where anger comes from and why I kind of black out and I don't consider the future when this happens. It's so important for us to understand what's happening within us in the way that our body was built to experience.
Yeah.
And not just this character defect, not just something wrong with you. So we start there. And then once we notice what's happening within our body, then we can start labeling it and naming it and being able to identify with words what this means. So when we say just communicate, that's that gap where we can actually describe what it is that I'm feeling. And then after that, then we can determine where that came from. But so often, like just this morning, I had this really big pang of anxiety hit my chest. And I immediately went into like, where's this coming from? What's happening without just acknowledging, how do I know that was an anxiety? What happened within my body? What emotion was I feeling outside of the anxiousness? Okay. And now where is it coming from and how can I remedy it? But everything has to start with a step.
That happens with me a lot. I feel like I have anxiety and I'm just like, why do I have anxiety? And I'm like, maybe I'm just not breathing right. I don't know. And I go through like steps to think about what is happening in this moment.
Well, yeah, because we assume naively that everything that's good in life is supposed to happen and anything that's bad in life isn't. So when we experience a distressing emotion, we don't quite know what to do with it. Our patterning is that this is bad. Don't be anxious. Don't be sad. Don't be angry. What's wrong? Just calm down. And it sets this tone for us from early childhood that anything distressing is not supposed to be felt. And with that ideology, of course, we're going to go right into finding a way to get rid of it or shame it or suppress it and just shove it down.
Right, true. So, okay, if there's one skill, I'm sure we already mentioned it, but one skill every parent could develop better to handle anger or conflict, what would it be?
Repair. While of course, like the blowups we don't want to happen, I firmly believe that within reason, of course, and within limitations, the way that we come back from that and the way that we repair afterward is sometimes even more important than the rupture. So not just because when we kind of curate our kids' experience to be this one where mom never gets upset, where mom and dad don't ever fight, it sets this tone that I'm not supposed to get upset. And then when I do get upset, there's something wrong with me. And then when I do fight with people who are important to me, I cut them out of my life. I don't know how to actually repair and move through it instead of just like moving on and acting like it didn't happen. So where I view it as us as parents, our job is to not only just keep our kids contained to our household while they're under it, it's in their adulthood. How can I set them up for the most success later with the most realistic expectations of what life and love and marriage looks like? Not just happily ever after and nothing happened. Like when couples come to me and they tell me that they never fight, I'm concerned. It's a big deal. You should be fighting. It's how we learn about each other and how we motivate change. So for me, the skill that I want parents to start getting really good at is to first acknowledge their part, not what they did wrong, not only what they did wrong, but what was living within that, what sparked within them that is quite literally this like inner child work, foofy or whatever. It's there and learning more about themselves. Yeah. I mean, it's curiosity. Yeah. And if we grew up in a household where we felt ignored or abandoned or unimportant, we sure as shit are not going to be the people who continue doing that to ourselves in our lives. So if I can acknowledge that within me, why this is valid, where this upset came from, and still take accountability for it, and also navigate with our kids what to look for, right? Usually what I used to say is, I got really upset last night. I'm really sorry. I should not have done that. That glass that broke, it's not important. And I will not do that again. And then our kid is like, cool, they're never going to do this again. I do it again.
Break it again.
Later. Yeah. Or that like, my mom I should expect my mom to not get upset with me anymore, which is just so impractical. And then we end up being these hypocrites. We end up being these people who are consistently inconsistent and unintentionally make them deeply dysregulated because they don't know when I'm going to pop off and when I'm not going to. So I want us all to work on acknowledging what it is within me, validating it, taking accountability, and then setting realistic expectations for ourselves and for what our kids can expect of us as we move. Put it on their radar. Let them know what you're looking for. So what I've shared
I think that goes for almost everything that adults can do, because almost everything that we do results from our childhood of some point. Like I was studying like relationship attachment theories. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, you have the anxious heart and the avoidant. Well, why is this person so anxious? It's probably something had to do with previous relationships or the way your parents handled things or to you. Totally. Or why is that person avoidant? Well, maybe that's the way he was raised and he saw how his family. So it's like everything that we do as adults, I think stem from a previous version of ourselves.
Totally. And I mean, we know that our attachment is pretty much ingrained by the time we're between 5 and 7 years old. So much of that is a working memory that I don't have access to. I don't really remember much before 4, likely even 5. So when we're talking about the first 5 years of our lives that we don't even know that we kind of got wired within, of course. And what we do is not what I used to do, which was understand people so deeply that I would give them passes and not hold them accountable to it or not demand better for myself just because I felt so bad for the upbringing that they had. So it happened between me and my husband. He had a really, really rough upbringing, and I always knew and understood where his behaviors were coming from. And so I excused them. And then ultimately I became more angry. I became more resentful. Shit got wild. And it was because of that incapability of me on my end to be able to say, hey, I get where this comes from. And here's what I'm unwilling to tolerate. That's your shit. And I have my shit. And then we have our collective shit. But I'm not going to just continue eating shit just because we each have our own.
Well, if in that scenario, like what if you understand where that behavior comes from and you understand A to B, but that doesn't mean it's okay. So how does that person how do they both deal with it?
Well, and it becomes there's a difference between an explanation and an excuse, right? We can explain these behaviors and you're still responsible. You're not to blame for the way that you were wired in your childhood. You are responsible for rewiring that in your adulthood.
Right.
And
they
so
have
that's
to
just
see
where,
it though. I think they have to recognize that in themselves, which I think might be the hardest part.
It totally is. That's why it's usually just getting someone like in the metaphorical chair in our work is oftentimes just the hardest part. But once they're there, usually there tends to be this really big eye-opening experience of how we were wronged, why I'm not the problem, and why I am still and how I still am contributing to it. And a lot of it, that's why, again, the professional friend part comes through. I share plenty about my parenting, about my partnering, about my entire life, because I don't know that the super clinical approach to anger is the best way. Anger feeds off of guilt and shame and regret. And when we're sitting across from a clinician who is working out of a workbook, also how I used to do it and people had fantastic outcomes. I'm not shitting on any other modality. I've just noticed so much more progression in clients when we can use really dark humor together, when we can acknowledge things together, when they're also hearing from their provider what she experiences as this person who is in like the provider chair. There's so much of that gets devillainized. And that's my ultimate goal across the board, is to devillainize anger and help us use it as our compass instead of this, like, again, deep, dark thing, and have parents in perpetuity feeling like absolute shit about themselves because they lost it and they don't know what to do to get it back.
That was all very, informative. How can our listeners get in touch with you, read more about you, all that good stuff?
Yeah. So my handle everywhere across socials and including my website is A Steady Space. It's the whole point, is like, come in, find your balance, and go back out into the world. And on my website, actually, or any of my socials, I have links to an anger archetype quiz. So when we're first starting to do this work and we're just inundated with conflict with me and my partner, with me and my kids, me and my coworkers, me and the guy who cut me off in traffic, there's oftentimes this overwhelm that comes from like, I have no idea where to start. And I don't even really want to, because that seems so distressing and overwhelming. So I actually created this anger archetype quiz. The archetypes are my own little brain children that help us see what archetype, what not only flares us up the most, but how that comes out, like how that presents in me, and gives us a realistic view of what's my dominant archetype and what I can start doing just to like bring some curiosity and awareness to myself first. So that's a free quiz that you can find anywhere. And then everything else comes from that quiz.
I'll put that in the show notes and I'm going to take that quiz.
Yes, please do.
All right. Well, it was so great having you. Thank you so much for sharing these tools and helping us understand how much power we have to change the patterns we grew up with. And for parents listening, breaking cycles isn't about being perfect. It's about becoming more aware, learning new skills, and showing our children what healthy emotions and communication can really look like. So thank you so much again for coming on and talking with us, and maybe we'll chat again soon.
Yeah, honored. Thank you.
All right, great. If there's someone that you want to hear from on this podcast, please feel free to send me an email. Or if you would like to be a guest, please reach out at Allie@Greyson'sChoice.org. If you would like to continue to hear our podcast, please consider donating at Greyson'sChoice.org. Any amount helps to fund our mission to help protect our children.